Tonight, human barricades mass arrests as trouble players at Port Botany. Buoyant banks shares surge in the wake of a multi-billion-dollar US merger. And on the crest of a wave, surfing's comeback king conquers bells and the world rankings. Good evening, Ian Henderson with ABC News. The standoff on the nation's docks erupted into an ugly confrontation today as police moved on picketers at Sydney's Port Botany. 22 people were arrested as police cleared a path for trucks seeking access to the Patrick terminal. Amid distressing scenes, one man appeared to lose consciousness and several children were caught up in the melee. The tug of war is also moving into the courts, with Patrick seeking an order to remove all picket lines and the Maritime Union lodging a writ accusing Minister Peter Reith of unlawful conspiracy.
It was a human barricade several hundred deep across the road, frustrating the passage of trucks into the Port Botany terminal. 4 drivers had already been turned away, but the 5th was determined to make it through. And this time the police decided they'd help the Patrick truck break open the picket. The standoff instantly turned into conflict as 70 officers moved on the crowd. They grabbed men, women and children by the arms and legs, dragging them off the road and carting them over the gutters onto the median strip. The protesters linked arms to increase their resistance. One man hung on so tightly his body was caught in a tug of war. 22 people were packed into 3 divisional vans, detained for breaching the peace. Police called a momentary ceasefire when they realised there was no room left to lock up protesters. But the fight was back on in seconds as the sacked workers again refused to let the truck through. The driver in the Patrick truck used a video surveillance camera to film the entire incident. In the end, he was forced to reverse and leave the gates of the terminal. The daily pictures of conflict may be making some in the government uneasy, but the Workplace Relations Minister isn't among them.
I mean, these people are doing all that they can to close down the business that they claim they want to go back and work to. It is an illegal conduct in breach of the Trade Practices Act and other laws, and therefore should be stopped.
It's the first time police have actively involved themselves in the dispute.
It was clearly outlined that if breaches of the peace were committed, that persons would be detained and that they would be removed to a place of safety.
Tomorrow, Patrick is expected to apply to the Supreme Court for an order to have picket lines removed from its terminals all over the country. Some in the union believe today's incident may have been manufactured to provide evidence. The Maritime Union will also be back in the federal court, seeking an order to have its 1,400 stevedores reinstated. It will also allege that Minister Peter Reith was a central part of an unlawful conspiracy to have them sacked. Patrick Chairman Chris Corrigan found himself under attack from a member of his own family this morning. Mr Corrigan's brother Derek, a staunch unionist, says his brother's motives are misguided.
If they are purely monetarily motivated, then I think he should consider that many people's lives and even members of his own family's lives are affected by what's going on and will be affected on into the future.
Chris Corrigan says his brother doesn't understand the issues. Meanwhile, the nation's first aquatic picket line took up position in the waters off Newcastle today. It was a David and Goliath struggle as sacked wharfies swam alongside the Star Sea Bridge to stop it from berthing. Julia Baggio, ABC News.
In Tasmania, unionists today rallied in support of dock workers at Burnie, who lost their jobs despite an enviable productivity record. Today, they were offered their jobs back, as long as they go on contract.
When more than 250 people came knocking on Chris Miles's door this morning, the Tasmanian Federal Liberal member wasn't home.
See if he's really our politician. Don't get our rep. Get our non-rep.
The march from the Burnie Wharf, a symbol of unity. Workers from more than half a dozen unions joining wharfies and Labor politicians to condemn the federal government in Patrick.
You didn't lose your job for any sin. You didn't lose your job because you were working badly. You didn't lose your job because you were unproductive. You were dismissed because you were a member of a trade union.
Workers at Burnie are dismayed at being sacked after they achieved an Australian record for shifting containers and have met the federal government's target for dockside efficiency.
And that's why there are 16 workers locally who work for Patrick's who've met world's best practice, who are the best in this country and are the best in this world.
Tasmania's avoided wharf confrontation so far, with maritime union members from P&O carrying out Patrick work. After talks with the Tasmanian government, Patrick has agreed to postpone the introduction of non-union labour in the state until after tomorrow's federal court decision on whether the sackings were illegal.
Cambodia. Australian trade and industry. Toyota announced this afternoon that it may be forced to lay off more than 2,000 workers because of spare parts held up on the Melbourne docks. There's also been a warning that meat exports are in jeopardy. In other developments, there's to be a High Court challenge to legal moves for the reinstatement of sacked dock workers. Injunctions against picketers in Sydney and Newcastle have been extended, and 2 big American unions may be asked to boycott Australian cargoes. Our report tonight begins in Western Australia, where riot police were called in to remove picketers by force.
In the early hours of this morning, more confrontation on the waterfront. Western Australian police wearing riot helmets and wielding batons moved in on a maritime union picket outside Patrick's Fremantle terminal. One by one, union members and their supporters were dragged away. The Port Authority said it was forced to call in police because of safety concerns.
This is great. Goes far beyond industrial laws, far beyond federal court laws. This now gets to the root of human rights.
Today, the federal opposition leader lent his support to the Fremantle picketers, accusing the government of destroying 13 years of industrial peace.
No Australian can feel secure when the Prime Minister plays fast and loose with the jobs of ordinary Australians. That's what he's done, and he owes the community an explanation.
Number of tourists.
In Cairns, the Prime Minister defended his actions, saying an efficient waterfront was vital to the country's future.
Unless we create the economic weapons and tools for Australians to compete effectively with the rest of the world, we're not going to survive.
In Sydney, protesters gathered throughout the night. News of a court injunction against maritime union members bringing supporters out onto the picket lines. By this morning, a vast crowd had gathered. Nurses, firemen, union members and non-union members. The sheer numbers enough to force a convoy of trucks to turn back.
I think we're going to see a growing interest in what's taking place. I believe the numbers on the picket lines will swell, and I believe that we'll be seeing more and more overwhelming support.
Daughters, sisters and wives of the waterfront workers vow to stand on the front line in the event of more confrontation.
And we have to be willing to be taken away before any MUA member gets moved from this site.
In a parallel battle being fought in the courts, an injunction against obstruction by maritime union members was extended until 5 p.m. Monday. But that does little to stop supporters stepping in to fill the breach. At the same time, warnings orders for Australian products may dry up.
If that suddenly comes to a halt, or a large percentage of that comes to a halt, overseas buyers will get very nervous, and they will finally have to look for other sources.
The stakes in the waterfront battle being raised higher by the day.
There's now a real threat of the waterfront dispute widening to involve other unions. Despite the federal government's warning that it will use the full force of laws against secondary boycotts, including heavy fines, unionists say they'll support sacked dock workers with direct action.
A collective battle cry from the union movement in Melbourne today. Union members at a packed rally rose to their feet to back sacked wharfies with broad industrial action. Their leaders vowed to defy prohibitive industrial laws with snap strikes, warning no worker's job is now safe.
We support the MUA. United we stand. We will follow the MUA to the successful conclusion of this dispute. Thank you.
In a show of solidarity, thousands of union delegates then marched to the Melbourne office of Workplace Relations Minister Peter Reith. As other unions rallied in support of the Maritime Union, the wider effects of the waterfront dispute are causing alarm. Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett warned of mass stand-downs if union blockades continue to strand thousands of cargo containers on Melbourne's docks.
By the end of this week, if those containers are not moving, there will be massive layoffs right around the state next week.
Carmaker Toyota is already feeling the impact of the waterfront dispute, announcing it will halt production next week because vital parts are stranded on Melbourne's wharves. The Melbourne Port Corporation today ordered union members to remove picket lines, warning they are trespassing. Union leaders claim they are doing nothing illegal by maintaining a so far peaceful assembly.
This is now a community-run picket, and they may come back tomorrow with a writ, but we need as many people here tomorrow as possible.
Come on this side of the container!
Earlier, angry union members hounded security guards who first hid from their tormentors and then ran to the safety of a minibus sent to rescue them. And the union's federal court battle to reinstate sacked wharfies has now moved to the High Court, despite attempts to bring on a speedy trial of conspiracy claims. Outside the court, ACTU President Jenny George deplored the use of riot squad police against picketers.
I'm appalled at the incidents that occurred in Fremantle overnight with the use of riot police. I think that is quite unjustified, but I'm very heartened by the growing numbers of people on the picket line.
In other developments, the federal opposition referred alleged breaches of corporate law to the Australian Securities Commission. As another showdown looms on the Melbourne waterfront, this ominous symbol seemed to herald worse to come.
Overseas again, a major setback for the peace process in Northern Ireland with an influential...
The southernmost capital.
Tonight, unhappy feeling. Toyota warns of mass layoffs over the docks dispute. The architect of the killing fields, Pol Pot, dead after a reported heart attack. And echoes of battle, revealing the unsung hero. Anderson with ABC News. The car manufacturer Toyota says it will lay off 2,500 workers next week because of the gathering logjam on the docks. With businesses around Australia counting the cost of the docks dispute, Prime Minister John Howard challenged Kim Beazley to take a stand. Mr Beazley promptly declared himself on the side of the workers. There was more confrontation on the docks overnight, this time in Fremantle.
Just before dawn, riot police descended on picketers in Fremantle armed with batons.
What about your workers?
But efforts to physically remove protesters were futile. In Sydney, the crowd was just as defiant, refusing to obey Supreme Court orders to stop picketing and let Patrick get back to business. The day ended with 38 trucks stuck outside the gates of Port Botany. Patrick's early court victories have had little practical effect, and major customers like Toyota are now starting to panic.
In terms of loss of revenue, of course, we're looking at probably something like over 2,000 cars a week, say worth perhaps $40–50 million. So.
Mr Neville says if he can't move components off the wharves by Tuesday, he'll have to stand down 2,500 factory workers.
The MUA will be once again responsible for damaging businesses and losing people jobs.
The Prime Minister called on Kim Beazley to clarify his position once and for all. The opposition leader, adding his voice to the cause in Fremantle, again sidestepped any direct comment on the union's tactics.
Well, it's pretty cute of the Prime Minister. I tell you who I don't support, and that's him. I do not support what he has done. I do not support the fact that he has connived at the illegal sacking of Australian workers.
Meanwhile, in Melbourne's federal court, QCs will continue to tussle over the future of Patrick's 1,400 former employees for at least another day. The case is a real conundrum for Justice Tony North. If he orders Patrick to reinstate the unionised wharfies, it'll put the new workforce out of work and potentially force an insolvent company to keep trading. On the other hand, if the court rules in favour of Patrick, it could be seen to be endorsing a kind of radical corporate behaviour that could leave any worker in Australia vulnerable to instant sacking and redundancy without legal recourse. In another legal play, the NFF and federal government will ask the High Court in Brisbane tomorrow to rule that the federal court has no power to hear the maritime union's case. Julia Baggio, ABC News.
Tensions now mounting on the Melbourne waterfront after a mass rally of unionists today voted for snap strikes to reinforce the picket lines. Some of them then made their way to the docks, ignoring repeated warnings that they were trespassing on private property. The Port of Melbourne Authority is tonight seeking an injunction to have them removed.
You are trespassing on Melbourne Port Corporation land and interfering with its proper activities and the rights of its tenants. The Melbourne Port Corporation requires that you leave its land.
Supporters of the maritime workers gathered at Melbourne's major wharves late today. They were threatened with eviction.
You're probably on the authority of the Premier down here, who generally likes a little bit of this nonsense, doesn't he? I mean,
the renewed protest had been fuelled hours earlier at the demand of the Victorian Trades Hall Council.
More than that, I want a commitment from you today. Who in this room is going to get down to that picket line this afternoon? Come on, who's going to get down? Stand up! Stand up!
The support to reinforce the picket line was overwhelming.
That action may have to be taken outside the Workplace Relations Act and outside the Trade Practices Act. Are you prepared to do that? I want your commitment.
More than 1,000 union members voted for a day of action on the 6th of May, which was endorsed by the ACTU.
And if it means that industrial action has to be taken on a broader basis than the position that it is now, then we will support it and we will call on you for that support.
The strength of their resolve will be tested if the Supreme Court grants the injunction tonight. Lynn Bell, ABC News.
In New South Wales, truck drivers have accused Labor Premier Bob Carr of lacking the will to break the pickets at Sydney and Newcastle. There were less police on picket duty today, but Mr Carr denies he's calling the shots.
Early this morning, trucks formed a convoy at Port Botany waiting for the order to roll onto the docks. But with only 30 police on hand and more than 400 wharfies blocking the entrance to the terminal, truck drivers thought better of running the picket. Now they're blaming the New South Wales government for failing to provide adequate police numbers.
We met with them and senior police, explained our situation, and we didn't get the support we feel we should have.
Premier Bob Carr repeated his support for the Maritime Union, but denies he's given police a directive not to break up the pickets.
We are not giving directions, political directions, to the police. The deployment of police is something for the police commissioner and the police on the job.
But those involved in this morning's thwarted convoy remain unconvinced.
Why weren't they there? Who gave them the instructions not to be there, or why weren't the resources made available when they made a commitment that they would be there?
New South Wales police say they are on the wharves as monitors.
We're not there to break the strike, we're there to prevent a breach of the peace. We're impartial.
Despite this week's earlier skirmish in Sydney, the police union says its members don't want to be involved in a Fremantle-style operation.
That's obviously a very, very difficult position to place our members in. We would be hoping that that's not going to happen here in New South Wales.
John Howard says it's clear Mr Carr is backing the Maritime Union.
Now, we know where Mr Carr stands. He's gone out of the wharf and put his hand up to the wharfies. Well, Mr Beasley put his hand up to the wharfies.
10 News with Tracy Spicer.
Tonight, waterfront confrontation. Thousands block a police move to clear wharf access.
Saying the onus for removing picketers lies with individual state governments and their police forces.
Calls her self-indulgent and obsessive.
ABC News,
and
Sydney.
A bumpy track in Malaysia gives the 500cc riders a tough workout. Good evening. The Maritime Union of Australia has claimed victories locally and overseas as the battle on the waterfront gains momentum. Police in Melbourne failed to break up a picket line at the East Swanson dock after officers were outnumbered by protesters.
Meanwhile, the British High Court has ruled in favour of the sacked wharfies as worldwide action against Australia begins.
The fight is being waged on Australian wharves, but the effect is being felt worldwide. In the United States, calls for a boycott of Australian products as the Maritime Union gains international support. That country's second biggest waterfront union wants Americans to stop buying Australian beef and produce. It says the Patrick sackings are part of a global push to bust unions on the docks. Other international union action is likely too after the British High Court overturned a ban on boycotting ships using our non-union waterfront.
Organising action of various types against ships which use Patrick's facilities, non-union labour facilities.
The British court described the Patrick sackings as preemptive. International support for the sacked wharfies looks set to continue.
And shipping companies will become increasingly reluctant to go anywhere near Patrick's.
But the federal government says it's not worried.
Mark Gibson's on the Sydney waterfront now. Mark, what's the mood like there now?
Tracy, it's been a pretty quiet day on the Sydney docks, although there's still a few hundred people down here at Darling Harbour, and they've basically decided, I think, that they're going to be here for the long haul and they may as well enjoy it. They've got people up singing and dancing, and there were some pretty amazing scenes at Port Botany earlier today where it became a real carnival-like atmosphere. In fact, members of the Turkish community turned up and handed out 500 free kebabs to the union members as they were there maintaining their picket. There was also singing and dancing there and people deciding to sit out in the sunshine. It's been a pretty good day here in Sydney to do that. So I guess the unionists now are just sort of hanging tough and just waiting to see what happens next while the rest of this battle is fought out in the courts and elsewhere, and they're just maintaining their picket.
Thanks, Mark. Mark Gibson on the Sydney waterfront. Depending on your point of view, Peter Reith is the villain or the hero of the hour, and he's our guest on Meet the Press tomorrow morning. That's at 8:30, right after Newsweek here on 10. And we'll have more on the waterfront to come in this bulletin. A heartbreaking cleanup's begun after a wave of tornadoes struck the US states of Tennessee, Arkansas and Kentucky. 11 people died. The damage is worth at least $100.
These are some of the most violent clashes we've seen since the waterfront dispute started. Since police moved in some 12 hours ago, we've seen several standoffs. A train and several trucks were turned away, so the unions are claiming some minor victory there. And the action at the waterfront today was really pivotal in the dispute. Unions say the victory here today on the Melbourne waterfront was crucial and a watershed for the rest of the nation. Day 81 of the bitter waterfront dispute, flashpoint at Melbourne's docks. The latest battle line, Coode Railway Gates, a violent clash as police try unsuccessfully to gain control of a fourth entrance to East Swanston Dock. Nearby, protesters blocked railway lines to Appleton Dock with concrete girders, a train loaded with truck parts forced to turn back. More than 500 police were bussed in from around Victoria, arriving at dawn to a sea of picketers.
When the time comes tonight, we stand together disciplined, and don't let your mates down, don't let them go, don't let the coppers drag them away.
Former Victorian Premier Joan Kerner joined the protest. ACTU Secretary Bill Kelty calling on his troops to remain focused on the struggle ahead.
One of the most important in the history of your union, but I think the most important weeks in the history of this country.
Police removed 2 lines of barricades before they were ordered to retreat. The Melbourne Remand Centre was cleared of all prisoners in anticipation of mass arrests. But the only casualty, a female protester taken to hospital with minor injuries. By morning, police had taken control of 2 gates at East Swanston Dock, but were still unable to move cargo from the waterfront.
We're delighted with that because every hour, effectively, that we stop Chris Corrigan is another nail in the coffin of this terrible fiasco.
So, Darren, what's expected to happen tonight?
Well, Tracy, it's really just a waiting game. The union picketers say they will maintain their presence, obviously. They've been practicing their drills throughout the day, linking arms and chanting MUA here to stay, so they're going to be here all night. The police will maintain their presence as well, although they are confident they can avoid confrontation. And just on a good note, plans to stand down 2,500 Toyota workers next week could be averted after P&O stevedores unloaded the company's spare parts at its Melbourne berth this morning.
Thanks, Darren. Darren Lunny. A violent explosion today has robbed a Melbourne man of his life.
No sign yet of the unionists backing down, so could be a long night. For now, back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Helen. Meanwhile, unions have hailed today's showdown on the waterfront a success, with protesters preventing trucks and trains entering the besieged dock. But the news may not be so good for the economy. International organisations are threatening to take action against Australia. Alan Rascal with the details.
As the standoff continued at East Swanson Dock, MUA boss John Coombs was hailing the pickets a huge success.
Notwithstanding the threat of the minister down there that it would be a bloody but brief encounter, everything's been reasonably peaceful and no trains and trucks have gone through.
Trades Hall Council Secretary Lee Hubbard has also praised the efforts of picketers, lashing out at those responsible for the workers' sackings.
Because every hour, effectively, that we stop Chris Corrigan is another nail in the coffin of this terrible fiasco.
Patrick says it will continue its efforts to get land transport through the picket lines tomorrow. Meanwhile, the possible stand down of up to 2,500 Toyota workers may have been avoided. A ship carrying 70 containers of much needed parts, which was to have docked at East Swanson, has successfully berthed at West Swanson. P&O workers attended the ship throughout the morning. It's unclear how much, if any, of the Toyota cargo was unloaded. Back at Appleton Dock, P&O workers were not as productive, police forming their own line, preventing anyone from entering that facility, which neighbours East Swanson.
We've got members out here that rightfully should be in there working, and it's just a sham, it's a disgrace.
But a win for the union in London, the British High Court lifting an injunction which had prevented the International Transport Federation from interfering with Patrick trade.
So there will undoubtedly be direct industrial action, including blacking of ships, which have been handled at Patrick's.
Less welcome, a call by a major American union to boycott Australian products in support of the wharfies.
And I would work very hard to make sure that that boycott doesn't go ahead, because it will be very damaging.
Kathy Boland with ABC News. It's been another turbulent day on the Australian waterfront, with police and unionists coming to blows on the picket lines of Melbourne's docks. Thousands of unionists converged on the wharves in the past 24 hours, successfully blocking attempts to access Patrick terminals and thwarting police efforts to clear a passage. Among those heading the protest, ACTU Secretary Bill Kelty, in his first wharfside appearance since the dispute began, and former Victorian Premier Joan Kirner. The Maritime Union is hailing the blockade as a victory for the wharfies.
They were hardly the most threatening protesters, yet it seems their presence was enough to force back a train bound for the Patrick terminal at Appleton Dock. At Patrick's nearby East Swanson Dock, picketers blocked a side entrance trucks were trying to access. Police made an attempt to break up the protest, giving up after brief skirmishes.
5,000 people down there, and we've totally turned around every truck and every train in Melbourne, and so we've not, and peacefully, no violence, they just weren't game to take us on down there.
But it's not just the large crowds which are deterring police. There's clearly a reluctance to buy into someone else's dispute. Over the past 24 hours, they've had a handful of opportunities to break up protests which Patrick says are illegal. Each time, they've balked.
I would hope that the main part of the operation has taken place, and from now on it would merely be us holding our ground. And
the determination shown by protesters today flowed from a dramatic night on the docks. For the first time in the dispute, ACTU Secretary Bill Kelty joined the front line.
History's going to record tonight and the next nights and the next days and the next weeks as one of the most important in the history of industrial relations.
In darkness, 200 police moved in on nearly 3,000 picketers. Police stood just metres from the crowd, which included former Victorian Premier Joan Kirner.
You now become a physical obstruction, and we are now entitled to remove you.
But the standoff ended abruptly when 2,000 building workers joined the protest. Hopelessly outnumbered, the only option for police, retreat.
Lock arms and show the solidarity that we're about.
At two smaller picket lines, a woman was injured and a young wharfie claims police punched him. Police say the picketers chose to resist and had to be moved. Michelle Fonseca, ABC News, Melbourne.
The international implications of Australia's wharf dispute are growing. An American dock union has announced a boycott of Australian farm products. The action follows a union win in the UK, with a British court lifting an injunction on the International Transport Workers Federation. The Federation will now begin coordinating a global campaign of support for the MUA.
The British High Court is a long way from the wharves of Australia, but this is where the latest round of an ongoing legal saga was decided. In a win for the Maritime Union, the court lifted an injunction against the International Transport Workers Federation. The Federation will now be able to begin a global campaign in favour of the MUA. It plans to contact dock workers around the world.
To do everything they can to influence shipping companies using Patrick's facilities to stop doing so.
It'll be the beginning of the end if that hasn't already started for Patrick's, because no ship owner is going to contract to a stevedore in Australia, which influences his contracts in any other country around the world.
In the United States, another union campaign has already begun. America's second largest waterfront union is demanding its members boycott Australian meat and farm products. The International Longshore and Warehouse Union argues Australia's wharf dispute is part of an international strategy to break dock unions. The National Farmers Federation is one of the main instigators of this attack on the MUA, so we will begin by targeting it.
It's a pretty popular tactic in the US. It's called the supermarket boycott. And these people like McGeechy running around union busting ought to take into account the fact that their cattle markets and their beef markets may well dry up as a result of these actions.
The international developments came as Patrick raised the stakes in Australia. The company is threatening to close down its operations at 5 ports if the federal court forces it to reinstate its sacked workforce. Patrick says its operations in Adelaide, Newcastle, Port Kembla, Burnie and Bell Bay would become unviable if it had to re-employ its union workforce. The federal court is expected to hand down its judgment on Monday. Mark Simpkin, ABC News.
Victoria is to get 22 new and upgraded police stations as part of a $47 million...
Patrick's chairman, Chris Corrigan. Chris Corrigan, thanks for coming in.
Evening, Maxine.
Where to now for Patrick's?
Well, we've got a rather extraordinary situation, I guess, where we're required to draw our labour for stevedoring purposes from these 4 companies that are insolvent, as described to the federal court. They are insolvent and are in the hands of an administrator. So it's quite a peculiar situation.
And those administrators, I gather, are working through the night to work out, in fact, how they can go about all of this?
I hope they are, because we want to start stevedoring.
Yeah, and of course, just to be clear, that you have been directed today to renew the labour contracts with the labour hire companies, the contracts you cancelled earlier this month, that's right?
That's correct, yes.
And the subsidiary companies will be able to trade on that basis because funds will be going from Patrick's to those companies, is that right?
Well, I point out to you that when those companies were in our hands, they were losing in the order of $10 or $12 million a year. So there'll need to be some significant adjustments to make them viable, I would have thought.
And in the meantime, you've got 2 workforces, haven't you? So there'll be more.
This program is brought to you by the new Lexus GS 300, the fast lane Lexus.
High Court dampener after union celebrates Supreme Court backing for the reinstatement of sacked Patrick Wharfies.
From National 9 News, this is Nightline with Jim Whaley.
Good evening. There was a string of astounding moves and counter-moves tonight in Australia's waterfront dispute. It started with a major victory for the Maritime Union when the federal court upheld an order to reinstate 1,400 sacked Patrick Wharfies. But even as the cheers rang through the country's waterfront picket lines, Patrick's was making its next move, applying to the highest court in the land for a stay on the reinstatement order. And as Laurie Wilson reports, a short time ago, that was granted.
For the Wharfies, it was a stunning victory. After the industrial turmoil and the legal wrangles, the full bench of the federal court upheld Justice Tony North's order that the sacked workers should be reinstated.
We have read and carefully considered the whole of Justice North's reasons for judgment, but we find them free from appellable error.
4 judges of the Federal Court have tried this now and have been unanimous in their assessment of the issues.
Corrigan and Reith and others involved in all the plotting and planning of that attack on the Union forgot one thing when they were putting all that together, and that's the law.
ACTU President Jenny George says it's now time for the Prime Minister to step in and end the dispute.
We want to get our men back to work, but more than that too, we want to get this nation moving.
John Coombs says he wants his men back on the wharves tomorrow.
These people need to be returned to work as early as possible so that the companies can be made viable and so that their ongoing employment can be secure.
But amidst all the jubilation in the union ranks, there was a note of caution.
We're going to celebrate tonight, but what we've got to do is remember, those people are not back in the gate yet.
Tonight, the High Court granted Patrick a stay on the Federal Court decision to reinstate the workers.
I just see this as a minor setback on the road to reform, frankly.
It may be minor for Chris Corrigan, but in political terms it is a major setback for the government, although Peter Reith certainly isn't admitting it.
Whatever the legal rights may be, and they will be fought out in the courts, in the end, this country needs an efficient waterfront. This country is an embarrassment internationally.
Meanwhile, the administrator of the Patrick's labour hire companies says he still needs to get the company's affairs in order before the men can be reinstated.
In the event that our stay application is not granted, we certainly need to be in a position to make a decision whether we will actually trade.
The union says it now plans to press ahead with a federal court trial against Patrick for unlawfully sacking its workers. That now hinges on the outcome of the High Court appeal. Laurie Wilson reporting for Nightline.
The wharfies have never thought for a moment that the government or Patrick would tamely accept a setback, but despite the High Court's ruling, the Federal Court's decision earlier tonight was seen as further vindication of their cause. And as Peter Harvey reports, they were quick to celebrate.
It was a long and anxious wait, but when the news eventually came through, victory was celebrated with a deafening cheer. At Port Botany and on waterfronts across the nation, the tears flowed. Wharfies and their families celebrating the result many of them had staked their futures on.
This is an absolute beautiful victory.
In Sydney, Darling Harbour hosted more elation. The relief was plainly obvious. This anxious daughter spoke for many.
They need their job, and, you know, it's just not right what's happened here.
In Brisbane, joy as they learnt they could return to work.
It's our workplace and we're going back.
With a legal victory in hand, the MUA's lawyers approached the gates of the Patrick dock.
Rostered staff of Patrick to attend their place of work.
A group of workers rostered on and ready to go were turned away at the gates. Even so, just knowing they still had a job seemed to be enough.
The victory part's still in there. No, the feeling is too great to express. It really is. I haven't got words to express how I feel.
Tonight, the Wharfies know they've won a very important battle, but they're also only too well aware that an entire war still lies ahead. And so tonight, they celebrated together, just as they'd fought together, ready to continue a battle that'll go on well beyond tomorrow.
Trade unionism is going to live in this country.
Peter Harvey reporting for Nightline.
Only an hour or so ago, Chris Corrigan, the Patrick Stevedores chief, was saying he didn't place much store in his company's appeal to the High Court. But now that the legal ball has bounced back in his direction, the game is on again. Mr. Corrigan spoke a short time ago with Paul Lynham.
Chris Corrigan, welcome again to Nightline.
Good evening, Paul.
In terms of public perceptions, did you never consider that those late-night mass sackings performed by security guards with dogs was going to swing a lot of sympathy behind the wharfies?
I think the opinion polls tend to suggest that there's a lot of sympathy for our move for waterfront reform, quite frankly.
I don't think there's any doubt that the public support waterfront reform, motherhood, apple pie, all sorts of good things, but they were less impressed with your methods.
I can understand that, but unfortunately that was the way we went about it, and it hasn't impressed everyone.
It wasn't the right way with hindsight, was it?
Oh, I still think there's a lot of water to go under the bridge at this point, Paul. We've got a very extraordinary situation here. We've got we're now drawing, in fact we can only draw our labour to perform on the waterfront from companies that are being run by administrators.
Well, now, is it not in the interests of your shareholders to try to make those subsidiary labour hire companies work?
That's for the administrator to work through. He's in control of those companies, not us.
But you could help.
Well, we'll certainly cooperate as much as possible. But,
you owe them some money, for example.
But bear in mind, those companies are now entirely in his control.
Are you going to pay your debt to them, though?
Well, we're working our way through the legal complexities of that, yes.
I gather it's about 14 million.
It's, well, we're not entirely sure of the amount, but that is being dealt with appropriately.
And the MUA's offered to kick in some start-up money as well.
Yes, well, we couldn't make these companies work for us, but maybe the administrator will be able to make them work. But what an extraordinary proposition. You know, you have to work for nothing in order to keep the company solvent. That tells you a little bit about why we were having trouble.
Over the past 24 hours, the Prime Minister has been quite noticeably trying to distance the government from Patrick and from you. Does that disappoint you?
No, I don't think the government's ever been backing us. I think what the government's been doing...
You gave a good impersonation of it.
Well, I think they've been backing waterfront reform. I think they've been very keenly interested in seeing Australia's gateway opened up and made more efficient and reliable. In that, we have a common objective.
So you weren't working closely with them on a day-to-day basis through those final weeks and months?
No, we were not working closely with them on the day-to-day basis, no.
Well, but how come then that on the night of the mass sackings, about 11 o'clock that night, Peter Reith had a press release all ready to go and his levy bill ready to go into the Parliament within a matter of hours?
Well,
remarkable coincidence.
Well, I'm not saying we didn't make contact with them. You said on a day-to-day basis.
But he knew in advance of the mass sacking. He must have, mustn't he?
He certainly knew it was a possibility.
But the fact that the press release hit the boxes of the press gallery here within minutes of those sackings, what are we to make of that?
Well, I presume that he was aware that it was a possibility of that on that evening.
You only presume?
Well, I didn't speak to him myself, but I presume he knew that it was a possibility.
It does look like a conspiracy, doesn't it? Which is what the Wharfies are alleging.
Look, it doesn't look at all like a conspiracy to me. The fact that people have common objectives, to me, has got nothing to do with that proposition.
And with hindsight, how would you do it differently? Would you do it differently?
Oh, I guess if there was there may be different ways of approaching it. I mean, clearly, it would have been better if it had gone more smoothly. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm still suggesting to you that the game is by no means over. And, you know, there's a long way to travel in this.
Chris Corrigan, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Now to other news, and Australian and New Zealand tourists have been injured in a bus smash in Paris. 40 people were hurt, 7 of them seriously.
Georgie Gardner.
Wharfies around the country celebrate as the full bench of the federal court agrees they should get their jobs back. But Patrick Stevedores wins yet another stay on their reinstatement. Good evening. It's been an important night for the wharf dispute, with the federal court upholding its decision that Patrick must take back those 1,400 sacked workers. But while the wharfies are claiming victory, Patrick is fighting on. It's gone straight to the High Court, successfully winning a freeze on the reinstatement of union members until an official application for a stay can be heard tomorrow. Our coverage tonight starts with the federal court announcement.
Basking in its finest hour, the unions emerged from the federal court in a state of delirium.
Ah, Jesus, what a night.
It's been 86 days since the start of WebDoc. This has shown what the family of trade unionism can do.
The full bench returning after 4 hours of deliberation.
We have read and carefully considered the whole of Justice North's reasons for judgment, but we find them free from appellable error.
Justice Wilcox saying the reinstatement order was upheld as a matter of law and not personal opinion.
Each member of the bench, like all sensible Australians, is in favour of an efficient waterfront. Export income is the economic lifeblood of our nation, but these are personal views.
Justice Wilcox said the court battle had polarised public opinion, provoking incidents which reflected badly on both parties.
They've engendered hostility and, in some cases, justifiable fear.
If these rogues could get away with their corporate scam, then no worker was safe. I appeal to the Prime Minister of the nation. You must dissociate yourself from the corporate transactions and the play that's been going on by Mr Corrigan.
I call on the government and Chris Corrigan, forget about these legal challenges. You're finished. You're done.
Refusing to grant a further stay of the order, Justice Wilcox called on Patrick's not to appeal to the High Court, saying its case wasn't particularly strong.
But within an hour, they were there, almost before there was time to open the doors.
This is causing embarrassment. We're going to go to the High Court. We'll make fools of them up there as well, exactly as we made him tonight.
Kelly Russell, 7 Nightly News.
Wharves around the country have taken on a party atmosphere tonight. The Maritime Union says that despite the High Court stay, its pickets have been vindicated.
It's been a long haul for the sacked wharfies. They've spent more than 2 weeks picketing to get their jobs back. Tonight is their night. Celebrations across the nation outside Patrick Stevedore terminals. In Melbourne, the wharfies were joined by thousands of supporters on East Swanson Dock. Even the ACTU's Jenny George went straight from the court to the docks to join the victorious crowd. And emotions were running high in Brisbane as well. For days the picket lines have been tense. Tonight, huge relief.
It's incredible to describe it. It was just a great feeling for everybody.
And in Perth, police allowed protesters through the lock gates, but they were later turned away at the dock. The man who's led the fight for the union, John Coombs, says justice has been done. He wants his men on the job, on the docks, tomorrow.
The employees of Patrick's have made a decision that they're not interested in the pieces of silver. They're only interested in getting their jobs back. And
despite the decision, the government's still determined to reform the waterfront and says the battle's not over yet.
There are going to be legal fights back and forward, and the unions will win some and the companies will win some. The companies have won a lot already. They've lost this one, obviously, but there's still a lot of legal fights to go on.
The voluntary administrators of the 4 insolvent Patrick companies say sacked wharfies shouldn't be too quick to celebrate. There's still the questions of funding and the replacement of non-union labour on the docks.
It could take us some days to resolve some issues, although I have the strong assurances of the MUA and the AMOU that they would work assiduously with us to shorten that timetable so that we could be operating as soon as possible. But it is a big task.
The boss of Patrick Stevedore says the company will comply with the federal court's orders, but at this stage he said they pose practical difficulties and appear to be unworkable.
If this leads back to the rorts and the overmanning and the closed shop that we've experienced for the last few decades, I don't think it'll be something most Australians will be happy with.
But on the waterfront, all that can be heard are songs of victory. Amanda Palmer, 7 Nightly News.
In Sydney, the sacked wharfies say they're ready to return to work at Patrick's Darling Harbour and Port Botany wharves. Jim Marr was with the picketers at Darling Harbour when the judgment was handed down.
Thanks, Georgie. I'm joined here at Darling Harbour by 2 people very much affected by this decision tonight. There's been a lot of celebrating, but let's talk to Robbie O'Reilly, who has worked on this wharf and was one of the people sacked. How do you feel tonight, Robbie?
Yeah, really good. Very, real good, yeah, mate. Never better, put it that way. I got a job.
You were a long-term member here.
Yeah, I've been here since I was 15 years of age. Out of school one day, on the wharves the next.
So you'll be walking back through those gates tomorrow?
I'll be one of the leaders. Definitely.
John, it all seems, John Garrett, one of the union leaders, it all seems pretty good news tonight. Is there a downside? Is there anything you're apprehensive about?
I think the decision tonight by their honour through Justice Wilcox confirms the litany of lies and the symphony of lies put forward by Reith and Corrigan, and We've seen the Costigan Royal Commission try to bring the painters and dockers down, and all it exposed was white-collar crime, and this has to be a rerun of that case where, again, here it's shown that there is a situation where there's been a conspiracy to oust members of a trade union.
And your recommendation is workers will be, they turn up here tomorrow at the first shift at 7 a.m.
7 a.m. Yes, that's correct. 7 a.m. orderly resumption of work to continue the restructuring that has taken place over the recent years.
John Garrett, thanks very much. There you are, Georgie. They're looking at getting back through those gates first thing in the morning, 7 o'clock.